Hi everyone, this is Venia Rogers. We connected last year and decided to do this talk on a really deep subject, the subject of death and the other side and that whole domain. And of course, today is particularly appropriate in that the moon in its monthly travel happens to be in Scorpio, which is the primary sign of that very topic. So I'll let Venia introduce herself, what she does, and tell you a little bit about what we'll be covering.
Hey everyone, this is Venia here, and I am a near-death experiencer. I had a near-death experience many years ago. It was quite extensive experience, very comprehensive. I was taken on a tour of not only space but to other planet, um, to different parts of the spiritual realm, and I got to see a lot of the mechanism of the spiritual side and also different elements of space in our physical realm as well as beyond our physical realm. And I saw quite a lot. And through that experience, I gained some gifts. But one of the main things that I did see was how astrology is actually a divine science. It is very real. Um, it is not a hokey pokey type of thing, and it is really a divine science. I saw the planets and their relation to not only Earth, but to each other, the energy that connects them, how they influence, excuse me, certain not only type of behaviors, but sort of set like paths where things can flow in certain type of ways. I am no expert astrologer. That is Andre. And that's why I'm really excited to be here with him because he kind of is the expert on what I know to be true about how the planets, asteroids, stars, etc., relate to each other. So, um, take it away, Andre.
Yeah, well, the first thing I can add to that is the what I said about Scorpio being the primary sign of death and dying, the transformation, the idea of something completely transforming. And you can add to that that the natural chart with, or the natural zodiac with Aries rising, then puts Scorpio in the eighth sign. And so that's why, I mean, if you do any, basic Google search, tell me about the eighth house, you'll hear these themes around death and dying, because that's what Scorpio is. But also the seventh sign, Libra, shares some of those characteristics in that both those signs are around sunset. And that's the whole logic, that when the sun rises, life is born, and then when the sun sets, the opposite happens. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad. It's just part of that symbolism, including that you don't just say, well, Scorpio is death and that's it. Scorpio is many things. For example, Scorpio is also, it turns into a bit of a joke, when you say, well, the death house is the house of taxes. Also, so, they say like the only sure things in life are death and taxes. So death, taxes, insurance, but of course, insurance is like you're covering, against something going wrong, um, including that there could be life insurance, for example, right? As an example of that, but also really things that appear to be totally different, like it's a place of other people's money, and so banking is in that place as well, and so it rules many things. But the primary is death itself, and then by extension, any kind of transformation. So if a person has connections to that part of the chart, as well as to Scorpio, they're more connected to the urge to change and transform and get beyond something, transcend something. That's
So, so from my understanding, which certainly doesn't rival yours, but I know enough to know that from what you just said, if a person has aspects to some heavy aspects to their eighth house, they could either like maybe Saturn aspecting it in some type of way, or I don't know, Mars, I would say. I would guess. Um, could that mean either severe issues with their health or maybe a passing or something traumatic happening in their life? Like, is
yes.
that okay?
Yes,
Okay.
although where astrology it can become incredibly slippery, and you always have to calibrate by actually asking questions because you don't know until you ask what the actual manifestation was. So I've done charts with people where the eighth house they don't want to talk about death and dying. They're talking
Right.
about, for example, another thing that it rules is inheritance because it's the house of shared resources too in relationship, the eighth house. So
Okay.
the idea of passing something on. So the person may be saying there's an inheritance possibility, or I'm in the midst of inheritance problems that I'm navigating through. Uh, and there'll be other cases where it's the actual thing itself. And then to add even more complication, sometimes it's not the house, but it's the ruler of the house, in the chart. Or how you said, it could be Mars because Mars does connect to Scorpio, or Pluto. Pluto is the
Right.
co-ruler of Scorpio, and Pluto is the lord of the underworld. I mean, it's a death planet. It rules nuclear power. I mean, if you want serious death, this is extreme energy. Uh, and then depending on, for example, like in your chart, you have a really strong connections to Pluto in your chart, right? So the odds that this
Hopefully
becomes
they're positive.
well, you always look at in astrology, everything is positive in the sense that
I know.
if you don't let things scare you, you could argue that the more negative in quotes, the more challenging, the more likely you are to make progress. That's the great irony that people want the easy stuff, but if you just get easy stuff, you don't grow, you don't transform, you don't get
Absolutely.
deep, right? So
Absolutely.
it's a whole host of things that work together. It'd be so easy if you could just put things in a box and say, well, that's it. That's the death thing, and that's the life thing, and that's it. It's not quite like that. You have to be able
Right.
to put it together, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So you said I have a lot of aspects to Pluto or
From Pluto. From Pluto.
from Pluto.
Yeah.
Ah, from Pluto.
Like
Okay.
if you link Pluto to particularly the sun and moon are the two, and to your moon, I mean, it's directly opposite. So that's enough right there, to correlate with something. And then you've got your eighth sign is Sagittarius, and that's ruled by Jupiter, right? So Jupiter, whatever Jupiter connects to, provides a talent immediately. You're born with some comprehension of something, some ability to understand something. Sagittarius itself is the sign of understanding, of building a philosophy. So if you link Jupiter to that, again, it connects it. And then you see that in your particular chart, if you look at the date of birth and you project downward as the planets are moving down day by day by day, that Jupiter, as you're aging, starts to become more and more and more important. So it links you to the topic in a big way, right? But that's getting a little more technical now. Although, by the way, with astrology, technical really is really basic measurement and counting. The only thing is a lot of people are unwilling to go that far. They don't want to look at columns of planets and visualize that's how this planet moves at a certain speed. And it's not that complicated. I mean, it's the kind of geometry we were taught in grade 9 or something. Really simple stuff. But you got to spend some time to develop
Right. Well,
develop.
I know, I am aware that, and I'm not sure if a lot of those that follow me are aware, but there's like I know that there's different type of charts. There's your natal chart, the one that you're born with.
Mhm.
There's a progressive chart that shows where the charts are as like in the now. compared to when you were born, and what's how it's affecting you now. Then there's the synastry, you with someone else. By the way, I'm sure Andre does all of those type of charts. So
I
if
do.
anyone's interested,
I do.
he's it'd be great to get a reading from him. But I just want to go back real quick to the eighth house for a minute, because I have been seeing that, and this has been for a while, since probably last summer, just the life source coming from Donald Trump, just being sapped away from him, and to the point where I can't even really sense too much there anymore. Um, do you have like a corresponding astrological configuration that kind of shows that?
Yeah, I mean, I gotta be honest. I'm amazed that this guy is still around based on. No, I'm serious. I'm serious. Like
Really?
in that sense, probably you would say, his father lived to a fairly advanced age, although he had Alzheimer's. And I think Trump has been demented and in dementia for quite some time. I mean, even by 2016, when he was much more alive, he was already speaking in reduced sentences.
Yeah.
If you look at
Yes.
his ability not that he's by no means a
Well, he's never
standard.
been a scholar for sure. Yeah.
No, no, but he used
Right.
to speak in much. If you go back 20 years, 15 years, but he was much better in 2016 than he is today. And this is this train you could see coming with, in fact, this very thing, tremendous pressure from that very house, the eighth house. So
Right.
if you start putting big planets there and they're doing death angles, then at minimum, as you say, your life force can be sapped, diminished. But it can also mean the worst, can happen to you in terms of being
And you
changed.
do see those, like,
Yes, 100%.
okay.
Yeah, and they're there this year, and they're still there next year, but they're definitely there this year. This year, it's a persistent pattern because he has he has Jupiter, or sorry, pardon me, Saturn and Neptune, two big planetary forces in that house doing death angles. You know, uh,
Wow.
Now,
Wow.
not
That's
yeah,
deep.
that's
That's
totally
deep.
true. And even the Jupiter itself. Now, for him, now, see, Jupiter is the kind of planet that will nearly always help you. Although in astrology, there's a rule that I like to use where I say things work until they don't. The planet that is doing something can flip and go the other way. And especially in
Right.
his case, you see, this is the curious thing. Jupiter in his chart, it's connected, unsurprisingly, to his communication house, which is his whole game. I mean, this man is all about
Right.
messaging,
And
calling
the
people.
charisma and the this.
Right,
Right.
right. And he's a
Right.
Gemini, which means he's a talker.
Talker, right.
Now, the Jupiter rules the eighth house, that same house. It rules that house too. Now, that's the house
Okay.
of other people's money. He is great at removing people from their money.
You
He's
got
he's
that right.
unbelievably skillful. But that's also the death house. So that planet, and this I've seen numerous times. You take a planet like Jupiter, yeah, it's bringing you money, but it rules death too. So be careful because it'll show up in a death pattern. And right now, it's in his sign, right? So the standard interpretation, which is true, and if you think back, when did things start to improve for him? Almost precisely when Jupiter entered his sign, which happened in June last year. Because
June.
prior to that,
Yes.
they were convicting him. I mean, it was looking pretty grim. So
Right.
the Jupiter helps, but it also rules the other topic, right? And so in your sign, it can help you. I mean, how much money are you going to take to the other side? None, zero.
Right.
Doesn't work, right? So both those things are operating simultaneously, right? In the current environment that we're in right now. So that's a fact, right? Uh, if he can get through to next year, he's got other problems from other planets. I mean, it doesn't change. But right now, in these upcoming months and into the beginning of next year, it is a serious threat. I mean, I would tell anyone that had a chart like that at that age, I would say, I don't know how I would put it. I would have to be sensitive, but
Right.
but I would say, for example, have you made your will?
Right.
Are you leaving it
Right.
all to, is Eric getting everything? Or is, I know, I
That
mean,
no, that is really fascinating because um and I happen to know what you said about Jupiter can work truly in your favor, but it also Jupiter can expand out of itself to the point where it works against you at some point too.
well, okay, but also, I mean, you probably can attest to this, I'm sure. Uh, Nearly every person, and I think this is a universal pattern, people that have near death experiences report entering a realm where they feel really liberated. They feel,
Yes.
for example, one person I talked with said that one of the key differences is that this realm we're in feels fragmented and compared to this sense of unification. So, in other words, Jupiter itself is also a in life, it's a freeing planet. It expands your life, right? Well, what better expansion or what deeper expansion could you have than to merge with the
Merge
ultimate
with
energy? I mean,
okay.
it's totally obvious, right?
Right.
And you see this quite a bit where Jupiter will show up in death patterns where, for example, the person has harsh energies from that basically they end their physical life.
Right.
Maybe Saturn and Pluto squares, let's say hypothetically, but you'll see a Jupiter trine or a Jupiter conjunct the ascendant, or something that liberates the person from their suffering and brings them into another realm.
Ah,
So, and,
okay.
and not only that, Jupiter that rules two signs, Sagittarius and Pisces, and
Right.
Sagittarius is a more uh, learning, teaching, publishing, understanding type of sign. Pisces is more spiritual, and the 12th sign, which is Pisces, connects you to deep health and hospitals, and lots of people die there too. So I mean, it's a transcendent sign. So Jupiter is not just what we see, especially in America. Jupiter is money and property and happiness on that level, or vacationing and all that. But it has a much deeper connection as well, which is why it shows up really frequently, in the charts of people that are passing away.
Speaking of Jupiter, I know I have Jupiter in my 12th house,
There
and I
you
know
go.
one of the things that the 12th house rules is prisons. So does that mean like I'm lucky and I won't ever go to jail because I've never been arrested?
Yeah,
I've
I mean,
never been arrested or even close to committing a crime or going to jail or anything.
right. I mean, the only counterpoint that I can think of in your chart, where this is where you have to be careful in the astrology, is that so you have Jupiter in the 12th. True, that is
Okay.
probably enough, right? But the
Right.
ruler, it's in Aries. The ruler of Aries is Mars.
Yeah.
Your Mars is really elevated, squaring like it's right up there at the zenith. So,
Okay.
so then there is where that's a potential you have to explore. When Mars is like that, if you are a reasonable person, it's not a problem. It'll actually help
Okay.
you. In fact, it helps you to make that subject public because it's so up there, right?
Okay.
But if for whatever reason a person hasn't worked out their anger, the combative energy of Mars, that potentially could get you in trouble that way, right? Because Mars is a classic. It's an even violent planet. It has this uh, combative, aggressive
Right.
energy. So
Right.
you have to calibrate it. This is in astrology. The way I always explain it is that the reason I call it proactive isn't some branding thing. It's how I understand it to be. And the best example is twins. Twins do not experience the same thing, and they have
Absolutely.
practically their charts are basically in almost all cases identical. And I would laugh
And
if an
yet they're
astrologer.
still different.
Yeah, they're very different, and it's
They're
because
very different.
it's because the twins, they channel the planets differently, and why they do that, who knows? I mean, you can do studies about sibling rivalry. Who knows what the reason is? But you'll notice one of the twins puts more emphasis on certain parts of the chart, and so they live it out that way, and they're experiencing things differently. Now they will share a lot of things as well because they do have the same charts, but they're different enough that it almost becomes nonsensical.
Right.
A scientist could challenge astrology and say that astrology obviously would have to be wrong based on its own logic. How do you explain this? And it's because the proactivity, meaning what are you doing with your planets? But then that also opens up the whole idea that you can do your planets better and get a better result. That's the whole idea, that your
Right.
life is not in that sense fated. It's open to you doing something to change outcomes. And I also know that to be true because I can look at my own chart and see planets that used to do certain things and they don't do that anymore. They do something much better. No, I mean,
Well, I,
yeah,
I got to tell you something. You're talking about the being fated. During my near death experience, I was treated to a view of my spiritual self and a few others helping me plan out this life, this particular life. Okay. And that's how I understood that we do plan almost most facets of our life. And one of the things that was involved in that was the actual alignment of certain astrological configurations that
right.
that that I would need to click with to be in harmony with what I came here to do. And I
Right.
describe all that in my first book, where I talk about um, just about everything is set up before we get here, and we do have free will to a limited extent,
Mhm.
um, but we are following a designed energy path,
Mhm.
um, and of things that we need to accomplish. And to follow that design energy path, one of those factors are the astrological configurations. And I just find it, fascinating. Like I know that in like, for instance, if I chose, I didn't in this life, but if I had chose to become like a billionaire in this life, I know that there's specific configurations that I would have had to click with before coming here astrologically, you know?
Right. Yes.
Right. And I know that you know like what a lot of those are, for instance. Like, can you give us a good example of one of those, like
Well, you mean of a
super duper rich ones that
well,
come
like,
here?
well, okay, but so Trump is a great example because the Jupiter in his chart, I was mentioning how it rules the eighth sign, which is rules death, but it rules inheritances. He inherited his money. He is from a young age surrounded by a lot of money, and he's pretty good by himself. He developed great ability to, you know, tap into people's mostly dark angels and remove money from their wallets. He's
Right,
incredibly expert at that. But
right.
you see the seeds both in the chart patterns and in the way his life, what he's born into. That's super helpful to have that. Now, an example of great wealth as well would be Bill Gates. He has Jupiter and Pluto conjoined in the money house. That's really good. I mean, Pluto is
So
itself,
Jupiter, the luck,
well,
expansion, and then
expansion next to it.
Pluto.
Pluto is
Right,
like a Pluto. In fact, one of the qualifications of Pluto is, among a number of things, is great wealth. It's the idea
right,
of something uh, like the idea of richness under the ground, for instance, valuable minerals, things like that. But in any
right.
case, it's a conjunction that gives you that. But in his case, it's a little different. He wasn't born into enormous wealth, but he was born into enough wealth, and he's also happens to be really smart, and he worked really hard as well. I mean, that's the other issue too. So you have to tap into all
So
those
he
things.
expanded all that.
He expanded all that. Yeah, yeah.
Right,
So
right,
but the whole idea though with that's an example where we say, if we take Bill Gates, in fact, even Trump too. Trump, whatever you want to say about him, he's relentless in his pursuit of whatever he's pursuing. He's got this thing in
right.
his mind, and
Yeah.
in fact, he lives in a kind of perverse moment to moment reality that he creates. And that's powerful when you're
Right,
this is, by the way, the magic of Saturn. Saturn is a planet that can cause a lot of problems, but Saturn's most stellar quality is focus, because it's the narrowing energy of the universe, right? So if you
right,
narrow your focus and you narrow it in a way that is productive, it'll really produce for you, right? And so
right.
and so and this is something that people can talk about Gates being a billionaire. When he was building his wealth, he was working constantly, work, work, work. I mean,
Right.
it was intense. So the point being, though, that that would be a good way to use Saturn. Maybe perhaps not as good being a total workaholic because then you're always tight and you're constantly only thinking of money. But it's certainly better than being paralyzed, which is another manifestation of Saturn when it's not working properly. Because contraction is what how people become depressed, paralyzed, stuck. You
Right.
know, things don't move. That would not be as good, obviously, right? So, in a way, Saturn, if you look at the symbol, it's the cross above the crescent. So it's literally the planet of work. What is your relationship to work? How do you make work fun? How do you focus regularly? Because that's what life is. You know, if you're waiting for a lottery, it might happen to you, but I don't recommend that as a strategy. You know,
Right.
to do it
Well,
now.
I know for a fact that Saturn will reward you, but you have to earn it. That I do know. You have to earn it with Saturn.
Right.
Whatever, yeah. Yeah, Saturn
Yeah.
is not going to give you like Jupiter, I know that gives you the stuff
Yes.
kind of, but Saturn doesn't do that, but Saturn also will reward you. So, yeah.
Yes. And Jupiter, by the way, Jupiter gives you. But the irony is, it gives you almost always, there are exceptions, but almost always it gives you about approximately what your Saturn is doing, right? So, in other words,
Uh,
because Jupiter is a benefactor, but most people will tell you, like, how do you earn your money? I work at this, I do this, and then I get some kind of expansion. It's not
right.
like Jupiter will just, if someone shows up at the door with a bag of money, that doesn't
Right.
that happens very infrequently. you know, and the thing is, my recommendation to people is always, even if you have, uh, you know, reasonably good flow already, don't forget the Saturn because the Saturn is
Right.
there all the time, and do a good job with it, which is nothing other than focus, and you try to refine your focus more and more. So, for example, those two, they operate on a basic level where I work, I earn money, or I work, I expand my life. But it's also the spiritual expansion because if you think about spiritual practices, they all involve some kind of focus towards some kind of relaxation, some kind of opening, right? That's Saturn
Right.
Jupiter working together, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So okay, I have seen intuitively, psychically, however you want to say it. I told on my channel, and I said this, I guess, back in December before Don the Con even got into office, but I just saw a lot of protests. And so now we're starting to see like
Hmm.
major, I mean, yesterday, for instance, there was
Hmm.
protests in every 50 states.
Yeah.
And then we had on the 14th, I believe, there were another, thousands of people protested. So I just feel like that's just going to increase. Do you see astrologically anything that correlates with that?
Yes. Well, first of all, as you say, they're already there. And in a few days, I think it's uh, maybe at 10 days or so, Venus is about to go retrograde. And
Right.
Venus is among, again, many meanings. This is how astrology works. You have to keep it's almost like planets have personalities and
They do.
they do
They do.
multiple things. So the Venus, one of the things that it connects to in the world and society is the consensus. We're all agreeing is what we value, what we think is important. And so when Venus goes retrograde, it's common to see people rebel against something that is happening that is violating the consensus. So, for example,
Ah,
back in 2020, when the George Floyd situation developed, Venus went retrograde, and the public became incredibly angry. They hit the streets, and rightfully so. I mean, what they were seeing was very unjust, and you can see
absolutely.
right now it's the field is being prepared for 40 days starting from about, let's just say, March. So all of March and part of April, Venus is retrograde. So expect lots and lots and lots of pushback and
And
organized.
Venus is in Aries, which is a very combative,
Correct.
energetic, almost. can be violent. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
Venus and
And
Aries, yeah.
Venus and Aries, although it'll backtrack into Pisces, part of that, then come back into Aries, but it is going to do it starting in Aries anyway. In Aries, it's square the American sun in Cancer. Like America has multiple
Ah,
planets in Cancer, so it adds another layer of urgency, to this whole thing.
okay, fascinating. See, this is why I love astrology. I love it. And you're the perfect guy because you explain things so well. But it's nice to get confirmation on things that I receive intuitively.
Mhm.
So, that being said, Andre, does it is there some configuration that shows if the protests are going to be work to some extent or be helpful or be productive?
I would say yes, but in a qualified way. In that I think everyone should you know accept that we're in this situation now. There are
Right,
people that are
right.
hoping for some kind of unbelievable reversal. Like the logic that, for example, that there was something wrong with the election and then Kamala is made president. Respectfully, I doubt that. Now, if it happens, I am really
Oh,
happy.
sure.
I would be
Right.
ecstatic. I'm
Right.
glad no problem with that. It would be
Right.
amazing and it would be fabulous.
Yes.
However, if you assume that that doesn't happen, then the period we're in now, the protests are there, and the fruitfulness of them, pardon me, it would be that you can see a lot of pressure in Musk's chart. Musk is, in a sense, the co-president. He's the one, basically screwing around in places he shouldn't be. And
I think he's actually the president, but go ahead.
okay,
The
well,
way, I
whatever. I
mean,
mean,
yeah,
he's part of it. And then Trump happens to have very harsh energy in during this period because Saturn is making it square to his
right.
sun and his moon from that house and so forth. And even if it doesn't do something catastrophically bad to his health, which it could, that's a possibility in there. Even
Uh-huh.
if not, Saturn is Saturn. When Saturn is around, Saturn's like the stop sign. It goes,
Right.
no,
Yes.
pull back,
Yes.
reduce.
Yes.
Also, you can see it in Musk's current Saturn. He's already in it already. He's having a Saturn square his Venus. You can see that he's getting a lot of bad press. He's getting lots and lots of,
Yes.
and his approval is in the 20s. I mean, it's classic Saturn, that
Right.
people can separately, just as a quick aside, sometimes I think of Saturn when it's in your life and it's challenging you. If you think of yourself as a kind of a like a stock or a security, your stock can go down. Now, are you willing to stick it out until until it recovers?
Right.
I remember seeing this many years ago in a work environment, and whoever had the Saturn, people would go, "Oh, that person's horrible. They should fire them." And then Saturn would leave, and they would recover.
Okay.
So that's how
Okay.
that worked. But knowing
It
it
puts a
consciously,
damper on things.
well, yeah, more than a damper. I mean, it's a challenging plan. So the point being that to answer to your question is if you see the retrograde period concurrent with these pressures, that's good because it's telling you that the people that are essentially causing a lot of the problem are being pushed back, right? But then you
Right.
have to say, they could get to the other side, and then they get other aspects. Like for Musk, the middle part of the year is much better because then Jupiter's in his sign, right? He's a Cancer.
Okay.
It enters there. Trump, it's more mixed because Trump goes from one problem to another. That chart is
Okay.
just besieged, Like for instance,
Besieged.
yeah, no, like I mean, think about this: the Uranus cycle, now totally different cycle, right? That cycle, 84 years, kind of inching along. So that planet, where it was in early July, late June, that was when someone tried to kill him, and it's going back to that spot. That's risky stuff. Now it may not show up that way, but it can show
Right.
up in some shocking way that, including to
Well,
his health
that's all
again, right?
Uranus does is shock.
Yeah,
That's what she
sure,
does. She's
sure, yeah,
pure
exactly,
shock.
exactly. So yeah, anyway, that was a long answer to your question about the will the protests bear fruit. I would say yes, but probably not everything, but at least enough that remember, I mean, it's the early part of the administration, so it's important to push back on them before
Absolutely.
they get too entrenched.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Andre, can we take a quick restroom break?
sure. Let's do that. Okay, let's take a quick break. I'll pause the recording.
Okay. I All right. Thanks for the break there. So I have another question for you. I know that you said that the United States is going through its Uranus return,
Hmm.
or that's coming up.
Coming up.
And we just went through, or are we still going through the Pluto return?
Yes, yes, and that the Pluto return. If you look at the degrees of the July 4, 1776, it's been an ongoing thing really for the last couple of years. And this happens with planets that are way, way out there because they
Right,
go forward and backward. They hang around a degree, more than, for example, if you talk about Mercury, it's really quick. It spins and
right,
spins.
right,
So therefore, it's not just one day, it's a period of years. Plus, there is this other thing where the sky is moving backward, so something called precession that means the Pluto position back in 1776 is now today in early Aquarius, so it's still there. Yes, it's the Pluto return. So
okay.
so yeah, so Plutonian
So
energy is around for sure.
Okay, so with that being said, so with both Uranus, because they're both basically generational planets, correct?
Correct.
Correct. So with them getting hitting their return, which is basically the same spot they were when the United States was created, so to speak. Um, does that signify, how do I say this? Not a violent type of situation coming up, but maybe like I don't know, yeah, maybe violent and also something major happening within the United States, affecting the United States.
Yes, I mean, look, so there's it's more. It's a Uranus, Neptune too, and Pluto. Now
Uh,
Neptune is because Neptune is where it was now is going into this area where it was during the Civil War. You know what happened then.
okay,
And
right,
and the explanation there is that Neptune in the American chart is a very prominent planet. So it means a planet that is prominent when it's moving around, it displays its prominence, right? And Neptune is at the high end, it's the most spiritual planet. But once it
right,
starts descending, it's a very idealistic, like people get ideas about what should be true and not true. And Neptune ultimately descends into total deception in that sense, it's a dangerous planet. So the
like
argument that
MAGA,
yeah, like
MAGA.
sure, like MAGA. Well, think about I mean, MAGA today is similar to the South in the 1860s. They
There
had
you
this
go,
crazy
there
idea.
you go.
So that is one pattern that is really important. The Uranus return, that's Uranus returning to where it was, which it did during the Civil War as well, but it also did in the Second World War because Uranus is about a half cycle to Neptune. Neptune is 165 years. Uranus is 84. So Uranus has returned. This is the third time it's come back, right? But it's a
Okay,
big, big cycle. So, yes. And the precise point is in the 2028 period. But you could say the Uranus return is, say, 27, 28, 29 in that range of this
okay,
decade, right? So yes, it could be violent. Probably a better way to describe it is it's disharmonious, contentious. There is something happening where there is disharmony trying to find a new equilibrium, a new
okay.
something, which is what we're going through, at the moment.
And not only that, but I think it's important to say this too, so as not to scare everyone, is the fact that not every aspect that we had back then is happening exactly like it was going to be
No,
in
they're
the
only
present.
echoes.
So it's
Yes,
it's going to have a different effect, a different outcome, etc. It may be similar, but not the exact same. Um,
correct, correct.
right.
Yeah, yeah. And and there's the thing is there's not complete information, unfortunately, because for this kind of look, it helps a lot to have charts that are as precise as possible, by all the key players and all this. But I've already said a couple of times that I'm hoping will encourage people, even though there are quite a number of people that think with someone like Trump and Musk and this whole crew, they say, that's it. We're never going to have another free election again. I disagree with that. From what I understand, but specifically with the astrology, I'll look at what kind of patterns do I see in Trump's chart, in the chart of Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, the Johnson, to kind of go,
Well,
okay, well, what's it looking like? And, to me, 2026 already looks quite promising. That's something to focus on.
I have seen Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker of the House. I have seen that psychically. Do you have astrology, or have you not done that yet? That would back that up.
Well, Hakeem Jeffries I have his day of birth, but there's no time of birth.
Okay.
Schumer, there's an actual chart. And so Schumer, I can compare to what already happened to. And I remember that when he gained the Senate, which looked like a bit of a tricky, because it, it
Okay.
took it took Trump helped him gain the Senate because Trump kept saying that the voting was rigged, and so then they had a bit of an undervote, and he got in. And
Right.
you could see it in his chart; it was pretty clear, a moment of empowerment. And you could also see in 2024 a big problem. I remember talking about that before the election and going, "Oh, the Senate is looking really complicated to me because of Schumer's chart." You can kind of know. But Schumer is doing much better in
Ah,
2026. The chart
okay.
really. So that's an example where, I mean, you just gotta follow the trail, and I know that can conflict with someone saying, "Oh, you're just doing Pollyanna now because it doesn't matter what angles are there. Doesn't matter. They're just they're gonna cheat and hang on to everything." Because I mean, keep this in mind, right? Even just the House would be a major problem for this group of people because with the House, you now have a important check on the presidency, much less if they get
Right.
both, if both were
Right.
to switch. And, when all is said and done, as long as voting is happening, number one, we know that almost always the incumbent party loses one or both houses one in the midterms. The only time there's that in recent years there's an exception was in the George Bush years because of 9/11. He was aided by
Right.
that. And then,
Right.
if anything, the Democrats did better than expected in the recent midterms. People thought they would really lose everything. They didn't. They hung on to the Senate. They lost the House by a tiny little bit. But now there's that pattern, and there's the fact that what they're doing is very unpopular. This kind of thing that you're
Extremely.
doing, just wait, and I can pretty much guess
Well,
that their approval is going to go down because you're going to start hurting your own people, and
well,
doing
you
these things.
know, absolutely. And one of the other things that I got was that eventually we're going to be moving as a society as one. I keep telling every video I've done lately has been the enemy of my enemy is going to become my friend. So the MAGA now that still support him will actually turn, and we're going to be operating almost as one against him because it's getting to the point where he's pissing off everyone, him and Elon and whoever else. Um, and so I just think that at some point we're going to be moving as one. Um, but there's just so much we could pick apart on this, Andre. I think we got to definitely continue this and have more of these sessions and
Yes,
pick each
yes,
other's brains.
yeah. It's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, all the major topic we were addressing was the transcendent state and all of that, but the current state of affairs is pretty intense. And the other thing that I think everyone should remember is that there is a cyclical pretty faded quality to all this, and that it's not just here. This is all throughout the world.
Absolutely.
There's a
It
problem.
is.
So you see this when the cyclical patterns, such as more strictly for the US in the 1860s, but definitely the Uranus return during the Second World War, they're big realignments of the world. And so people talk about AI, but there's a struggle, something we have to go through, in order to get to the other side and arrive at a better place, right? And it's not comfortable. This is where, if you look at a person's individual chart, they'll look nostalgically back to when they were having the hard time and go, yeah, that period was really fruitful. But if you ask them in the middle of the period, they'd say, oh,
It
I'm
was like
hoping
a
it'll end.
nightmare.
I'm hoping it'll end.
Exactly. Right.
I'm
It was,
hoping
oh
it'll
my
end soon.
God.
Yeah, yeah, right,
Exactly.
right.
Yeah.
So, and that probably is the art of the wiser you become. I mean, at least feels like that to me in my own life. I go through those cycles better than I used to, but they're still not, they're not
They're not fun.
not as
Like,
much fun. No, no, of course, no,
not
no,
at all.
no.
Not at all, for sure.
It's like so
For
it's like
sure.
the price you pay, right, for
Right.
knowledge. The
For wisdom and understanding and all of that for sure.
Yeah, see
Yeah.
that's the logic of, it's really interesting, the Christian religion, the cross. The cross is the square. It's the idea that planets are at odds. So the number four is a developmental energy, but it's challenging. It's disharmonious. It's on its way to going toward the threes. So hence the idea of suffering. But I don't know that I think you should always be focused on suffering, just that it's part of life. And you certainly feel it when you have planets in formations of two or four, which is what the cross is, right? So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And I remember, I'm sure you've heard of her, Linda Goodman.
Yes.
She was an astrologer from way back. I thought she was an excellent astrologer. But one of the things that she said was every square can be made into a circle, but
Yes.
it's just transforming it, getting it into that circle, and what you have to go through.
Yeah.
Um, a circle of understanding and that type of thing. But Andre, this has been great.
Likewise. Yes.
Let's definitely do this again really soon. And I'm so sure the people on my channel are going to love you to death. Your knowledge is so vast, and you explain things very well. And I think we can do a lot with this.
All right. It was a pleasure. We'll say goodbye to everyone for now and hopefully more soon. Bye, everyone.